The central Gulf of Mexico has been hit hard over the past 5 years. 8 months ago, the BP drilling disaster began to add its impacts to those of Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, Gustav, and Ike. Once again, the coastal communities who had been hit by the 2005 and 2008 hurricane seasons took the brunt of BP's blow.
It's similar to after Katrina situation. There was so much stress on the fishing communities and some of the other people. When the hurricane comes, we come back, it's over, we rebuild our lives and know what to do. I've talked to many people who live in the coastal communities, and most all of them would rather have another Katrina than have the oil spill.
With 1,000 miles of coast affected by BP's crude and miles of the Gulf's seafloor covered in oil, scientists and the conservation community remain uncertain of how bad the impacts will be. But
it's just all oil in there. Yep, exactly what it smelled like. It's like a cliff. It looks like jagged cliff marks, but it's all oil.
Unfortunately, the governmental response to this disaster was uneven and inconsistent, and greeted with mistrust by those paying the price for the oil industry's mistakes.
Governments can tend to follow the same MO in a disaster response, and they become very defensive. And I guess it's a natural human tendency to not want to be criticized and to want to look good and to try to spin things that make it look like they did a better job than they actually did. But in truth of fact, the response didn't work very well. We know that. They know that. They're not really leveling with the people. And there's a lot of coziness still between the government and the industry about this that's not very public-spirited, to be kind.
From the initial estimates of how much oil was being released to current claims about public health and seafood safety, governmental assertions have been received skeptically by communities who feel left out and let down by the powers that be.
People started showing signs of upper respiratory infections, coughing, sore throats, what they called a heavy chest. BP did not bring in any doctors that knew how to treat petrochemical exposure. So we basically had to take it upon ourselves to prove the exposure and to prove that something had happened.
To ensure the lessons of the BP disaster are learned, the Gulf Restoration Network is joining with many other organizations in calling for the creation of a Gulf Coast Citizens Advisory Committee to allow the affected coastal communities to play a watchdog role as oil drilling continues in the Gulf of Mexico.
Here we are 7 months later, and Congress hasn't done anything. Congress has had a number of hearings. We've been up and testified in front of Congress a couple of times. The House passed a bill. The Senate has not passed a bill to deal with this disaster and to do anything to make sure that we learn the lessons of BP's mistakes. But we want to see what happened in Alaska happen down here. In the wake of Exxon Valdez, they created citizens advisory committees that put the communities that pay the price kind of at the table. So the commercial fishing folks, the folks from the subsistence communities, the native communities that rely on these resources. These are folks who really should have a chance to check the math of the oil industry and make sure that their response plans aren't about walruses, but they're in fact about real resources, pre-staged, ready to be mobilized. So the next accident, it's not a matter of if, right? It's a matter of when that can be dealt with.
Visit bpdrillingdisaster.org to add your voice to the call for a Citizens Advisory Committee and to urge Congress to act now to pass legislation to ensure a sufficient federal response to this crisis.